Thank you for joining me, Maryann Gebauer. And my guest today is James Perloff. James Perloff has been an alternative media journalist since 1986, when he began writing for the New American Magazine. He's author of 8 books. His first, back in 1988, was called The Shadow of Powers, which was an expose on the Council of Foreign Relations. And this particular book sold very well, over 100,000 copies, and was just released actually last year. He wrote another very interesting book in 2013 called Truth is a Lonely Warrior, which is a comprehensive primer on the New World Order. And more recently, in 2019, he wrote a book called The 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw. And then in 2020, wrote a book on COVID-19, which became Amazon's #1 bestseller in its category until Amazon censored it after 2 months. And more recently, he's written a book called Exploding the Official Myths of the Lincoln Assassination, and that was a couple of years ago. So, James Perloff, you are a prolific writer and have so many interesting things to say. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be on with you, Marianne. Thank you.
Well, I want to wind it back a little bit to the beginning, uh, where it sounds like your worldview shifted.
Mhm.
You read a book called None Dare Call It a Conspiracy by Gary Allen. Describe to me what happened when you read this book.
Well, I happened to see a girl reading that book, and I didn't have an opportunity to speak to her. This is 1978, and somebody told me I need to get that book, and so I walked into a bookstore on Massachusetts Avenue in Boston, and at that bookstore, that book was right on the shelf, so I bought it, and it really changed my outlook forever because it explained world events in terms of a New World Order agenda, and it's very clear how it had been unfolding. It was not just a random unfolding of events, which is what we're basically taught in public school.
Mhm.
That changed my life, and having smaller writing background, I began writing for the New American Magazine in 1986 and wanted to investigate this whole plan for a New World Order, what it meant politically, what it meant spiritually, and I just kind of took it from there.
So you are a Christian. You
Mm,
became a Christian, and
right.
your story of becoming a Christian, I thought, was very interesting. It was quite a dramatic experience for you. Do you want to briefly share what that was? Because that has shaped your worldview as well.
Sure. I grew up in an agnostic home. We weren't churchgoers. And then I had a lot of difficulties in my youth, and I got into the New Age movement in my 20s, this is back in the 1970s, trying to find solutions to some of the problems I was having. And that was when I encountered Gary Allen's book. And one of the things I gathered from that book was that there was a spiritual battle going on. It had to do with basically a war, a spiritual war between uh, God and Satan, even though the book itself didn't put it in those terms. And I get involved with the John Birch Society, which Gary Allen had mentioned as an opponent of the New World Order, and began writing for their magazine. Um, and but before I started writing for the magazine, I did become a Christian. I got out of the New Age movement and spent about 30 plus years in evangelical churches. And finally, in 2017, I joined the Eastern Orthodox Church. I won't say I'm an exemplary figure of the Orthodox Church. I'm not a theologian, but I did find that the Orthodox Church worships in the same way the early Christians did. And this is something I felt I needed to do in view of the panorama of diverse denominations we have here in the West, and which is very confusing when people look at it. It's hard to identify the true Christianity. I do feel that Eastern Orthodox Christianity, um, more than the Protestant Catholic paradigm we think is the only choice we have in the West, that the Eastern Orthodox Church uh, holds truest to the original fundamentals of Christian worship.
Hmm. So when you look at the world stage today, do you feel as though there is a war on Christianity? Like
Absolutely.
yeah. Is that the overriding sort of how would I say? Not agenda, but if you pull it back from bird's eye view, is that ultimately what's going on?
Absolutely, and it's taken place in many forms. One of the things that fascinated me, having been dissuaded from Christian faith in my sixth grade years by being taught the theory of evolution. Um, One of the chief attacks in Christianity was Darwinism, which Darwin himself characterized as a slow and silent, sad attack on the Bible. He knew you couldn't attack the Bible directly in Victorian England. So, because the people respected science, he introduced his theory as an alternative to creation by God, that life just began in this liquid pool of this primordial soup of chemicals by chance, and that God was not a factor in it. And of course, once this became taught as science, people began to think that the Bible had somehow been discredited by science, which it hadn't. That led me to write two books in 1999 and 2002, Tornado in a Junkyard, and the case against Darwin. And actually, Darwin's theory is very debunkable. If you go to my YouTube channel and check the video called Creation versus Evolution, the evidence against Darwin's theory is overwhelming. But that's one of the attacks. Another is Hollywood's depiction of Christians as, these abominable type creatures, and of course the laws that have been passed that violate God's commandments. Um, the I recently wrote a post on the Emperor Constantine, who has been attacked, particularly by the Da Vinci Code, as having somehow invented the divinity of Christ, even though documents from the first, second, and third centuries before Constantine already said that he was divine. So the attack has come from many angles, and anybody who looks at what the deep state's doing to us, I think, could agree that it's satanic, and Satan certainly wants people's faith in God and people's faith in Christ to be obliterated. So yes, there has been a deep state attack on Christianity. It's one of their main objectives.
Do you think that is the main objective, and with that, I guess, breakdown of the nuclear family? Um,
Mhm.
the
Sure.
what do you think has been the most successful attack?
Um, well, uh, there have been so many. I made a sort of a list actually of things that have been done to us. The contrived wars, the genocide, like in Gaza, uh, depopulation, which people like Bill Gates and David Rockefeller have been into, the destruction of national identity through illegal immigration. That is part of their plan. Um,
That's a big
uh,
one in Canada right now. That's a huge one
right.
in Canada and across Europe, I guess. Pretty, yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
There's the geoengineered weather, which they disguise as climate change. There's the bioweapons they disguise as vaccines. There's directed energy weapons, chemtrails, genetically modified foods, cellular damage from cell phone towers, abortion, homosexual marriage, and transgenderism, all of which go against God's stated will. Restrictions on freedom, whether from the Patriot Act or COVID lockdowns, or now carbon limits on people's energy use, human trafficking, especially of children, the destruction of our economy by the Federal Reserve through printing of money, inflation, digital currencies, unpayable debt for the United States, plus the rising surveillance state coupled with digital ID and censorship. Those are just some of the ways we're under attack right now. No one can deny that this is evil, and it's certainly coming from the evil one.
Wow, that's quite a list, and you've
Mm.
covered you've covered a lot of the big issues here. Which is, in your mind, the most ominous or the most threatening?
Well, all of these things are actually combining. When I
Hmm.
wrote my first book, The Shadows of Power in 1988, I focused on the Council on Foreign Relations, which was a tool to drive the world towards a one world government. In fact, the Council on Foreign Relations, which has supplied cabinet level personnel for decades to presidential cabinets, um, it was specifically created to encourage the American people to accept world government. It was founded in 1921 after the U.S. Senate had rejected our joining the League of Nations. And after the League of Nations died, then the same people were behind the UN. What they're leading up to, if I could unify this, is what they want is an end game of world government in which Satan will rule as the Antichrist, which is prophesied in the Bible. I like to point out to people that to govern the world, which is what the book of Revelation says, to govern the world, you need a world government.
Hmm.
So the plans of the deep state have not just simply been about gaining power and making money. They use money and power to attract leading politicians into recruit them into their scheme. But their ultimate goal is to create the reign of the Antichrist, seated in Jerusalem and ruling over the nations of the world. That is the most unifying thing I can think about their purpose. It may not be readily observable to people who are just looking at the political aspects of this, but there is a spiritual warfare that's being undertaken behind it.
Well, do you think then you hear the term Armageddon engineering? Uh, do you think certain factions are trying to engineer Armageddon?
So, I actually have not heard that exact term used before. So, are you saying that they're looking to create like a war, like a third world war that would usher in the Luciferian age? Is that
Yes,
what you?
yes,
Yeah,
almost like or have they looked because they obviously can read Revelations as well. Do you
right.
ever feel as though they're maybe orchestrating things to appear like Revelations to further their goals?
Yeah, I certainly think that Satan knows the scriptures, and he quoted them when he confronted Jesus in the desert and took him to a high place, took him to a mountaintop, took him to the top of the temple. He knows the scriptures. And so a lot of Christians have been duped by what they call Christian Zionism into thinking they have to support the rebuilding of the temple, which is very clear from scriptures, not a place where Jesus will reign from. It's a place where the Antichrist will rule from. He wants to rule from Jerusalem. Zionist Christians believe, for the most part, that he's going to be back, that Jesus is going to come back, he's going to rule from a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, the third temple, they call it, for 1,000 years. They're basing that on a single passage of scripture, which is Revelation 20. Very dangerous to base a doctrine on a single passage of scripture. But yes, they're trying to draw Christians into the Christians' knowledge of scriptures that can be interpreted in different ways to fall in with their plan and to make them think that when the Antichrist appears in the temple, that that's going to be Jesus, because he's going to do miracles and he's going to be passing himself, trying to pass himself off as Christ coming back for his second coming. Um, the Bible says he will rule for 3.5 years. They put it in different ways: 42 months and 1,260 days, or times time and half a time. They all come down to 3.5 years. It's interesting that Jesus' own ministry lasted for 3.5 years. I think it's just possible that in the cosmic arrangement of things that God told Satan, I'll give you 3.5 years, the same amount of time my son had, but you're not going to get any more than that. But yes, they're definitely leading us up, trying to lead us up into accepting Antichrist as Christ. And that's one reason why he's called the Antichrist.
Very interesting. So when you speak to Christians who maybe even subscribe to the Scofield Bible, how do you make all this clear to them? Because I've had many discussions with Christians who feel that as a Christian, we should be supporting Israel. What are the main points that they're missing? You alluded to some, but expand on this because this is a huge conversation.
Right. See, do I have a copy here? I do. Okay. I read the Synaxarion, which is all 7 volumes, 4,000 pages. It's a history of the saints of the Orthodox Church. There wasn't a single Zionist among the saints from the time of Christ until now. It's not historic Christianity. You mentioned the Scofield Reference Bible. That was backed by the Zionists. It's interesting that in 1904, Theodore Herzl was running the Zionist congresses in Basel, Switzerland, went to see Pope Pius X and asked him for the Catholic Church blessing for the Zionist Jews to take over Israel. He refused. At that point, they needed to go to the Protestants, and that was the birth of the Scofield Reference Bible. Same year, 1904, he went to England. He was introduced to the head of Oxford University Press, who immediately agreed to publish this Bible sight unseen. No publisher does this. Schofield had no credentials. He'd never been to a seminary, a college, a university. He had no schooling in the ancient languages of the Bible, Aramaic, Greek, or Hebrew. He was totally unqualified to write this Bible. In fact, according to one of the listed contributing editors in the Schofield Reference Bible, named Gabelin, his son said it was his father who wrote all the notes to the Schofield Reference Bible, but the Schofield Reference Bible was designed to reinterpret the Bible to say that Christians support Zionism. And that book, millions of copies were published. And I've been to churches where pastors would hold up that Bible, and it has unfortunately degraded and created a great deal of misunderstanding among Christians. Actually, we hear a lot about Judeo-Christianity today, but that wasn't historic Christianity. In reality, if you study the history of Christianity, usually Christians and Jews were at odds with each other. All men are created in the image of God. I'm half Jewish myself, but this is not Christianity. Christians have been deceived. They've been deceived and given their support to Israel. And I just want to say that in my early studies of the New World Order, I recognized communism and globalism as parts of it. But in the circles I was involved with, they didn't mention Zionism. They said, well, that's anti-Semitic. But as time went on, and I found about 9/11 and the dancing Israelis, and I found about various terrorist acts that the state of Israel had committed in its goal of a greater Israel, I realized that Zionist Christians are on the wrong side of history. And I don't want anything to do with that. But globalism, Zionism, and communism, those are three heads of the New World Order's Hydra.
Very interesting. So you have Jewish ancestry. When
Mhm.
you mix with other Jews, do they agree with you or do they disagree? What's the sentiment in the Jewish population on the topic
Well,
of Jewish Zionism?
it really varies. Now, my father was Jewish, my mother was not. My father was not a Zionist. He couldn't care less about Israel or the Rothschilds or anything like that. In fact, he had no Jewish friends. He never went to synagogue. I didn't even know he was Jewish till I was 21 years old. He
Mm.
never mentioned it. He had no interest in it. And there are many um, Jews who have been matriculated into American society and they have no interest in it. However, there are Jewish supremacist groups such as the Likud, Chabad, Lubavitch, um, B'nai B'rith, the Kabbalists, and the heavy-duty followers of the Talmud who are into Jewish supremacism and seek a Jewish state. But I have to say that although the Zionists might be if you look at the power pyramid, they are very close to the top, but at the top is Satan and his fallen angels and his demons because this is spiritual warfare. But definitely um, Zionism and creating greater Israel and the whole business of Trump recognizing Jerusalem instead of Tel Aviv. Pete Hegseth saying he's looking forward to the miracle, the rebuilding of the third temple. He's been deceived. I don't think he really understands that this is a temple for the the Antichrist. In fact, let me just quote the scriptures on that just to back up what I'm saying a little bit. I'm going to quote the Apostle Paul. Um, he said this in 2 Thessalonians. He said, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, he's talking about the second coming, of course. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction, who will oppose and exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. End quote. That's a perfect description of what they're planning to do. Satan is going to work some miracles. He's the father of wars. He can call off wars. Jesus stopped a storm in the Sea of Galilee. Satan can do the same thing just by calling off geoengineered weather. And Jesus was all knowing, he because he was God, he was omniscient. So he spoke to the woman at the well, famous passage in the Bible, and he knew all about her life, and this convinced her that he was the Messiah. But today we have AI, which is sort of mimicking omniscience. You can ask it virtually any question. You might not get the right answer right now, but um, the Antichrist could mimic Christ's omniscience through AI. So he has a lot of tools at his disposal to deceive Christians and deceive the world.
Fascinating. So, in a sense, maybe the elite are trying to summon a figure or unwittingly fulfill kind of a satanic prophecy with all of this. It's almost like they're orchestrating something.
Right. It's not too often that Christians and Satanists agree on something, but something they both agree that the Antichrist is coming. Aleister Crowley called himself the Beast 666, and many occultists are looking forward to their Moshiach, their coming one. But he is not our Savior. He is not Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ will come um, approximately 3.5 years after he takes his seat, and then brings his wrath upon the world.
So, why is it, do you think, that Christians have been deceived on this very fundamental point? Because
Well,
this it seems clear what the truth is, but how has the church been so hijacked? What was the method that they managed to hijack the leadership and sabotage the message?
the big lie, the repetition of constant lies. I attended Christian Zionist churches for a number of years till I finally saw through the deception. But the mass marketing of the Schofield Reference Bible, which I alluded to earlier, was
Mm-hmm.
one of those methods. People just being mistaught. And I should also mention, I have articles on this on my website, which people can read for free. There are also chapters in my books. Um, Tooth of the Lonely Warrior and 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw. But the Rockefellers funded seminaries. This goes back to predating 1900. That would teach modernism. Modernism tried to convince people that there were no miracles and that the scriptures were unreliable, and there were no real miracles. This was all invented. And they even questioned the existence, physical existence of Jesus Christ. Fundamentalists rejected that. Of course, they say, well, no, we trust our Bibles, but unfortunately, their Bibles got hijacked by the Rothschilds and Oxford University Press with the Schofield Reference
Yeah,
Bible,
yeah.
which convinced evangelicals that they should support Israel. So whatever side of that fight you were on, the Rothschilds always like to fund both sides of wars, and the Christian war between the fundamentalists and the modernists was no different. They got both sides going for them. And this is one reason that I got out of evangelical churches, because people in my church were advocating war, unjustified wars. I'm not against a just war, but America's never really been engaged in just wars, and they were 100% support of Israel. But in my years in the Orthodox Church, I've never heard one sermon that supported the modern political state of Israel. They don't take that side, and that was one more refreshing thing to me about Orthodoxy. But
Interesting.
I have to say that I still respect people of other faiths, whether it be they Protestant or Catholic. I had many meaningful encounters with God myself in non-Orthodox churches, but just for the ultimate truth, I felt that Orthodoxy was the correct path.
Are there some very outspoken Christian leaders that you respect who are speaking clearly on these issues and trying
Sure.
to inform the masses? And who are those Christian leaders that at this point that you respect?
Well, I would say that Pastor Chuck Baldwin, former presidential candidate for the Constitution Party. He used to be a Christian Zionist. He's totally changed, and he now is a firm critic of Israel. And there are others who are doing that, but I think he's the most prominent one that's taken a stand against Zionism.
It must be a dangerous stand. You know,
Well, I would say so, sure, because you're going to get hit hard with charges of anti-Semitism and censorship. I've been heavily censored. We mentioned my book on the big C, COVID, being censored by Amazon, even though it sold over 3,500 copies in less than 2 months. Um, and I'm totally banned from Facebook, shadow banned on Twitter X. Um, they use that, they silence people through censorship so that the alternative views don't get through effectively
Hmm.
to most people.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkable. We're living in do you think that this historically is a remarkable time to be alive?
Yeah, I would think so. I don't necessarily think, oh, we're lucky to be alive in this time, because I think it's going to be a very hard time at least on the short term basis in the coming years. On the other hand, we have advantages that people a few decades ago didn't have. Like, for example, when I was a kid in the 60s and in mid 20s in the 70s, the only sources of information we had were network TV news. And in Boston, where I live, we had two newspapers, the Herald and the Globe. The Herald would give you the Republican Party view, and the Globe would give you the Democratic Party view. But there was no real alternative media. You had to be cooked up to the John Birch Society or a newsletter like Hilaire de Berrier's letter out of Monaco. Um, and very few people knew how to do that. There was no search engines, there was no internet. And so we pretty much were at the mercy of the mainstream media, which is very controlled. It was through the internet that people could start searching out information and making discoveries, probably to a greater extent than the deep state imagined when they allowed the public to have access to the internet.
Well, and do you believe that the internet was their creation?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I think that AI and everything that we see developing, television is a great example. We had um, an era of the 50s, which is a very nostalgic era. I was a child in the 50s, and it actually was a very nice time. And television was very mild. Leave it to Beaver and Father Knows Best. And there was no cursing, no homosexual characters, no sex, no graphic violence. They had to do that to get the TVs into people's homes. And it was also TVs were pretty expensive back then, a few $100, look like a few $1,000 today. So to get people to buy them, you had to have a middle class that was pretty prosperous. So the 50s pretty were prosperous, and it was there were no wars at that time. They wanted people just to focus on getting this medium of television to their homes. I've noticed that there's always a lull in wars before they introduce the next medium. So before World War II, they got 85% of American homes with radios. And then before Vietnam, they got over 90% of all American homes with TVs, so they could give us a TV war in Vietnam. And then before 9/11, they got we had a time of relative peace. We had the short Gulf War in 91 and the invasion of Grenada a few days under Reagan, but basically a time of peace. And so they could get the PCs and the computers. That was the next stage of technology into people's home. Now it's AI. Now they're bringing AI into people. So they progressively brought all these technologies into people's home to further propagandize them. And usually, when a new means of communicating on a mass basis to the public comes around, it means that trouble's around the corner.
Yeah. And are you concerned with AI? I mean, even insiders who have created this technology are now going, oh, you know, it's you've let the genie out of the bottle. And they're expressing concern. But how concerned are you about AI?
Well, it's certainly very handy and useful, and they want it to be that way so people will use it.
Hmm.
Just like television had to be very family friendly for them to get used to that. When you talk to AI now, it's very friendly. It says, "Oh, that's a great question. Well done. I'm going to help you out with that." I have a kind of a feeling that over time, AI may be weaponized the way TV was weaponized against the public, and perhaps at the end of a day, the AI may say, "Well, you've just violated rules 24, 36, and 87 of the government's code, and we're going to have to deduct points from your social credit score." And I think AI in the end will not be so friendly as we see it now, but they have to make it very user friendly to get it in. But on top of this, as I'm sure you know, AI is consuming a tremendous amounts of power and water, such that some residents of areas near AI have had their water supply severely diminished, and there's all kinds of threats being posed by this new technology.
Yeah, it is. It's hugely energy intensive. And that's alarming because apparently energy is a problem. We have a shortage of it, but they are
Right.
sucking it dry in a lot of communities. So that's the irony, right? Is that there's not enough energy, but there's always enough energy for AI.
Right. It's just like there's not enough wars to build our roads and or refurbish our power grid and repair bridges. That one in Baltimore, I forget how many years. It's quite a few years before they can have that one rebuilt. But yeah, all the money's going to the wrong thing. Just like with the wars, we spent trillions and trillions of dollars on wars in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, now in Iran, and but there's never enough money for what we need here at home in the USA. So this is clear evidence that the deep state does not have our interests at heart at all.
So do you view the deep state as being on both sides of, say, the war in Iran, which things are changing as we speak? It sounds like there may be a, a peace agreement, but we'll never know. But do you look at Iran as evil as the West? They're all in it together, or what's your view on Iran?
But that's actually a pretty challenging question. You know, your sympathy is going to have to be in Iran because Israel has done so much damage, and Iran is the first country that's actually fought back against them.
Hmm.
And they've also really humiliated the United States with their drones inflicting so much damage, these very cheap drones and Patriot missiles, which cost $4 million a piece. They shoot up one Patriot missile, but meanwhile, there's dozens of drones up there, and plus a missile which releases dozens of bomblets. And the missile can take out one drone, but that's it. And they've humiliated the United States, and um, I don't want to be unpatriotic, but when I see my country doing something wrong, of course I'm going to be against that. And we can get into the whole uh, several aspects of the war on Iran, which was it justified? Was it legal?
Hmm.
Did Trump tell the truth about it? Things like that. But you've asked an interesting question. Are they in charge of both sides? Now, I wrote an article in 2009 for the New American Magazine called The Shah in Iran, What Really Happened. And it's funny, I got invited on a podcast last year to do a show. I didn't know that the host was a Christian Zionist. When he he saw that I'd criticized America overthrowing the Shah in 1979. He thought I would approve of the 2025 bombing of Iran, and I was against it. And then he said, "Well, isn't Iran the greatest terrorist state in the world?" I said, "Well, actually, Israel has its own issues with terrorism," and he censored the entire interview, even though the interview had been the Shah in 1979.
Yeah.
He censored the entire interview. So on my new YouTube channel, it's only 3 months old. I did put up a video on the whole history of how the U.S. took down the Shah. And this raises a question. They were supporting Ayatollah Khomeini. Ayatollah Khomeini got more than 100 media interviews. He was protected by the CIA, which had in Neauphle-le-Château in France before he went to back into Iran. He's protected by the CIA and MI6. The West was tearing the Shah apart on 60 Minutes, and all our congressmen were denouncing him, and finally was forced out. General Robert Heuser was sent to Iran to force the Iranian military to stand down and not defend the Shah. There's a whole bunch of details we don't have time to go into, but it raises the question, are there figures in Iran today who, at the very highest levels, are actually working in concert with figures in the West to bring about an end game, or are they simply patriots who are trying to do the right thing? The United States has turned on its allies so many times, whether it was, after World War II, World War II, China and Russia were allies, and then as soon as the war was ended, then China and Russia were our enemies. We supported Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. Our OSS, forerunner of the CIA, armed and trained his men, who then overthrew the government in Hanoi shortly after this, in August of 1945. Then we fought against Ho Chi Minh in the Vietnam War. more than a decade later. Or if you look at Saddam Hussein, we supported him during his war with Iran in the 1980s. Donald Rumsfeld was over there, shaking hands with him and hugging him. And then by 1991, he'd become a bad guy. And same thing with Osama bin Laden. He was trained by um, U.S. Soldier named Ali Mohammed, and we supported Osama bin Laden, and then he became the enemy. And so I don't know with the current regime in Iran if secretly they are working at the top with the West, or if this is just another case where we've flipped on someone and turned them from good guy to bad guy. This I don't know. But that your question is a very penetrating one, and one that I don't have a complete answer to because like all of us, we're not flies on the wall. We don't really know what gets said in the highest levels of the deep state.
Well, when I look at Iran, how they behaved during COVID, they followed the same course of action that every other country did. They did the
Mhm.
lockdowns, they pushed the vaccines, they got the funding from the IMF. It doesn't sound as though they have a different agenda, really. They're
Mhm.
why would they be doing all of this if they were really nationalistic and looking out for their own people and viewing the West as the enemy? Then why would they follow the same action plan? It seems rather suspect, right?
It does, and that's why I say I don't completely trust the Iranians. I know that the original Shah was actually a very good man, despite what people in the alt media say today. They attack him. They say he was a puppet of the West, but actually he was a force for stability in the Middle East. The economy in Iran under the Shah was amazing. He There were more Iranian students when he fell uh, in the United States than any other foreign country. In America, um, he treated the poor with kindness. He gave millions of acres to farmers. They had a stable economy. He built dams so that Iran became self-sufficient in food production. He was an excellent leader. That's one reason they wanted to get rid of him. He was against the drug trade. He was a main opponent of Soviet ambitions in the Middle East. And I don't think it's a coincidence that 1979, the year he fell from power, was the same year that the Soviet Union was able to invade Afghanistan, which is on the border of Iran. He's a good leader. But this does not mean, by the way, that I support the return of the Shah's son to rule Iran. Although I'm sure there's some monarchists in Iran who would like to see him back there. He is a Zionist. He's friends with Netanyahu. He's not the same as his father at all. But it is a very complex situation. Without really knowing more about the inner motivations of those at the top of Iran, it's hard to say whether they are, again, genuinely patriotic or are simply working in tandem with the Western deep state to bring about some kind of goal that is sort of at such a level that we, at our level in alternative media, can't perceive it with clarity.
Hmm. Well, also the Shah, the father, didn't he want to nationalize the oil? Wasn't he pushing back on that as well? And that was a little bit of an inconvenience for the West.
Right. There were a number of reasons why they decided to take down the Shah. Now, many people in alternative media know about 1953, how the CIA backed a coup against the Prime Minister Mossadegh,
Hmm.
who wanted to nationalize oil. Well, what most people don't know um, is that when the CIA reveals something they've done, it's because they want you to know. What they don't want you to know is they turned against the Shah. The Shah was also, just as you say, Maryann, was trying to nationalize oil, and that's one reason they turned against him. But if you watch my video on the Shah. I have a clip there from 60 Minutes when Mike Wallace was interviewing him, and the Shah denounced the power of the Jewish lobby in America and its influence on the presidency. And today, there are many people like Pastor Chuck Baldwin, Congressman Thomas Massey, who's going to be forced out soon, Congressman woman Marjorie Taylor Greene, um, and Jody Griffin, author of Creature from Jekyll Island. Many people in the West have woken up to the power of the Zionist lobby. The Shah was already talking about that in the mid 1970s. And I think, along with the oil, that's one of the reasons why Henry Kissinger, who was the one who originated the plan to overthrow the Shah, it was Henry Kissinger, um, that the Jewish lobby decided that the Shah had to go, and thus create an atmosphere of instability in the Middle East, which certainly his fall did generate that. He had been a great force for stability. He even built an Olympics complex and applied to host the 1988 Olympics, which eventually went to Seoul, Korea. But can you imagine a Middle East country hosting the Olympics? That was the kind of guy he was. He was very patriotic, very much concerned with the welfare of his own people, and getting rid of him was a very much a deep state objective. There was no alternative media, and unfortunately, many people in the media, when they denounced the Shah, they're listening to 60 Minutes and other mainstream organs. There was not a genuine mainstream media, alternative media, except for people like Hilaire de Berrier, who were telling the truth about what was really going on in Iran at that time.
So, I remember that 60-minute interview. It was fascinating. Do you think that that was like, I was surprised that 60 Minutes aired that portion of the interview where he denounced Israel because that it felt like that interview backfired a little bit, right?
Well, I think it gave the Zionist deep state ammunition to and motivation to take down the Shah. So I think that 60 Minutes wanted that known. They did the same thing. Same year, 1979, with President Somoza of Nicaragua. Um, Dan Rather went down and hit the piece on Somoza to knock him out, and they both fell from power in 1979. And then I think it's not a coincidence. Then after Somoza and the Shah fell in 1979, then you had the Iran-Contra controversy of the 1980s that followed. Things are being planned at a very high level, and one reason why the deep state always seems to be a step ahead of us is that I know people can't accept this, a lot of people, but actually it's not just David Rockefeller and the Rothschilds, but above them at a spiritual level is Satan. They say Satan never sleeps. So he's got a worldview that goes back for centuries. And this whole New World Order plan, going back to the French Revolution, Masonic revolutions, the overthrowing of kings, because the Rothschilds knew they couldn't intermarry with hereditary bloodlines. So you had all this nonsense about Marie Antoinette saying, let them eat cake. And you had George III being portrayed as this evil tyrant, which he wasn't, by the way. Um, for the American Revolution. So they've been very busy overthrowing kings and hereditary monarchs, except for those like the current one in England, which is cooperative with them uh, in order to create so-called democracy, republican, socialist states, which they could then control. Because the Rothschilds, of course, they own Reuters and many other media organizations. They could control the votes, and then instead of having kings and monarchs in place and nations with strong national identities, you would make these countries in Europe nothing more than provinces of the European Union, and you would control their prime ministers because you control the voting, especially by controlling the media, and now it goes electronic voting on top of that. So we've been watching the New World Order unfold in a very clever way. It's been a plan that's been undertaken for centuries now, and all leading up to one goal, which is the establishment of that one world government, which will usher in the Antichrist. And that's basically how it's been running.
Hmm.
There's a lot of holes I haven't filled in. We could talk about so many things like the Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, the Korean War, the Beatles. There's just so
Yeah.
many
Oh, there's
things
so
that
many. Well, actually,
this,
let's
yeah.
let's let's hone in on the wars. I'm actually in the midst of a book right now called
Hmm.
Hidden History, and it's written by two gentlemen who reveal what was really going on before World War One. And it's fascinating because the history has been rewritten according
Hmm.
to the victor, with a very tainted perspective. And I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, this is not at all what we were taught in school. Let's talk about the wars. So you would say all wars not only are bankers' wars, but deep state led wars, right?
Correct. For example, if you look at the Spanish-American War of 1898, the American people were lied to by the yellow press. They were told that Cuba was a Spanish colony, had been for more than 400 years, but it was the richest colony in the world and the world's largest sugar producer. And the Rockefellers wanted to get control of that. And so Americans were given a lot of blarney about how the Spaniards were committing atrocities down in Cuba. Um, and how they're roasting priests over Spitfires and they were throwing Cubans to sharks and all this other nonsense. Um, and that was the war. It was a pivotal war because up until the Spanish-American War, Americans thought the purpose of our military was to defend America.
Hmm.
This is the first war where Americans were told the purpose of your military is now to bring democracy to foreign countries, which became a pattern that would be followed ever since.
Hmm.
In point of fact, Rockefeller's National City Bank got control of the Cuban sugar industry. It was a great break for them, but Americans thought, oh, we're fighting this to fight colonialism. But, we used that war to acquire from Spain. After defeating, we acquired Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and so Americans wouldn't be confused. We didn't call those colonies, we called them possessions. But that was an expansive war. It was a deep state war for sure. Then if you go up to World War One, that was what you said you've been studying the history of. There were several goals to the First World War. One was to create the League of Nations as an incipient world government. One was to create the Soviet Union as the first Marxist state, and another was the Balfour Declaration of 1917,
Hmm.
which coincidentally was the year that the Schofield uh, Bible was published en masse by Oxford University Press. And the Balfour Declaration, of course, Britain promised to create a Jewish state in Palestine, even though England had never been in Palestine before. They had no authority there whatsoever, but in order to please the Zionist state and in exchange for bringing America into the war over the false flag of the Lusitania, um, um, that was then brought about. If you take it up to, and of course, there's always men's profit taking. After World War One, there's something called the Graham Committee of Congress, which issued a 21-volume report revealing that Wall Street bankers and industrials had stolen billions of dollars of the American taxpayer from munitions that were never sent to the front or even manufactured. They just folded the money back to their own companies. But you know what? Not one banker went to jail, despite that 21-volume report and indictments being handed down by Congress. And then if you go to World War II, you have Pearl Harbor as the false flag. And what mainstream historians won't tell you is who made the decision to put the fleet in Pearl Harbor. It was Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president, cousin of Winston Churchill, who had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy when the um, Lusitania went down, just like his cousin um, Teddy Roosevelt as Assistant Secretary of the Navy when the Maine went down.
Hmm.
And Winston Churchill was the head of the Admiralty when the Lusitania went down. Now he's Prime Minister when um, he and Roosevelt are figuring out how to get America into World War II. You know, um, World War II. Um, well, I was talking about Pearl Harbor. Let me just mention, besides Roosevelt planning to put the fleet in Pearl Harbor, and by the way, if you're looking for full chapters on Lusitania and Pearl Harbor, it's in my book, 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw, but it's also free. Those chapters are also free on my website, jamesperloff.net. Um, the head of the Navy, um, the Admiral Richardson, was the um, went to the White House and he protested to Roosevelt. Said, "Listen, you should put the fleet in Pearl Harbor. It's be attacked from 360 degrees. The ships will be packed together like sardines, making them ideal targets for bombers. We'll have to resupply the fleet over 2,000 miles." What did Roosevelt do? He fired Richardson, and on top of that, the attack on Japan was provoked. We gave Japan basically a death threat. We put an economic embargo on them, was strangle them, that they were dependent on imports for oil, for food. And we said, we'll only um, lift that embargo if you remove all your troops from China. Well, why were they in China? They were in China because the Soviet Union was invading China. They'd already conquered the northwest province of Xinjiang. They'd invaded Outer Mongolia, and the Japanese were a barrier to that. And the deep state wanted to pull Japanese troops back into Japan. The Japanese said no. If China and Russia, which are across the Sea of Japan from us, both become communists, we're next on the hit list. We have to defend ourselves. We
Hmm.
can't pull all of our troops back from the mainland of Asia into Japan. Um, Plus, Roosevelt and his cohorts in Washington had complete foreknowledge of the Pearl Harbor attack through decoded intercepts, both decoded naval intercepts and decoded um, um, uh, embassy intercepts. We had broken their codes. The Japanese did not know that. We knew the attack was coming, but we did not warn the commanders in Hawaii, who Roosevelt then scapegoated for the attacks. And the last thing, of course, would be the cover up. There was an intense cover up. Even though the Army Pearl Harbor Board and the Naval Court of Inquiry found that Washington had complete knowledge of the Pearl Harbor attack, that was suppressed. And new inquiries were done by fellow Freemasons. You know, Roosevelt was a 32nd degree Freemason, which overturned those the Navy and Army investigations. And so that was, and you can go up to Tonkin Gulf, which got us into Vietnam. You can go into to uh, the Korean War, totally unnecessary war. Why was North Korea communist? Because American diplomats decided that Stalin should be awarded North Korea. Forget it. The Russians only took part for 5 days in the Pacific War. We were the ones who fought the Pacific War, not the Russians. But since they were so-called the co-victors for coming into the war after we'd already dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, they were awarded North Korea. That was an artificial war designed to validate the UN. Harry Truman didn't even consult Congress when he sent our troops over there. 30,000 American soldiers killed, 100,000 wounded. He called it a police action. No, it was a war. If you go through time, you find, all the Middle East wars were fought. And I'm sure you've heard General Wesley Clark talk about how right after 9/11, there was a plan in the Pentagon to attack 7 countries, of which Iran would be the last. We're now
Iran,
seeing
that's
that.
right. Iran, that's very eerie because
Yeah,
that was and when he stated that, I thought, ooh, it's all happening one
right.
by one.
Yeah, yeah. This
Seven
is
out of
a,
seven
a
now. Hmm.
yeah. This is a very well thought out plan that is, often beyond our reach, and we can have to grasp at the snippets of information we get, like that interview that General Wesley Clark did with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now, where he revealed that and put together the picture. We don't have the full picture because we don't sit at table with, the Bilderbergers or the Trilateral Commission or the Council on Foreign Relations or the Economic World Forum. But from what we can gather, we can piece together a pretty good idea of what their plan is. And it seems that they have a lot of attention on 2030. You've got UN Agenda 2030, and you've got Klaus Schwab and his World Economic Forum saying that in 2030 you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. They seem to be focused on that date. By the way, um, theologians believe that Christ was crucified in 33 AD, and they said that's why the Freemasons make the 33rd degree their highest rank. But if Christ's ministry did last for 3.5 years, it appears that his ministry began at 23rd in the year 30 AD, and it looks like the Antichrist, they have got him set up to start his quote unquote ministry in 2030 AD, which would be the 2000th anniversary of of uh, Christ beginning his ministry.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of parallels. Again, the Antichrist is going to try to mimic Christ.
It's so remarkable. So, in all these wars and looking at even the more current ones, Russia, Ukraine, what's
Mhm.
your position on China or Russia in this, in in the current? Because I feel as though Russia, of course, and China are pitted as the enemy, as a threat, existential threat, really.
Mhm.
How do you see China and Russia?
Well, it's very hard to like China. They have something called cyberspace ID. Everybody in China has to have a digital ID, and they don't even have any hard currency anymore. Even a beggar, if you want to give money to a beggar, you've got to use a smartphone and use your QR code to make a donation to a beggar. Their social credit score seems to be a model for the rest of the world. In fact, oh,
Yeah, it does seem that they're
yeah,
leading. They're leading the
um,
pack in terms of the technology. But we're hearing a lot of people come out and sing the praises of China and Russia right now, which I find a little bit unnerving or troubling.
right. I wouldn't trust China for a second. I wanted to just quote something that I inquired this. This is actually from last year, but I asked Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI. I said, how many countries have digital ID? It said this quote, as of 2025, over 100 countries have implemented or are actively developing national digital ID systems. At least 50 have mandated their use for accessing government services, travel, or financial systems. 186 out of 198 countries have now foundational ID systems where identity records are stored in digital format. So we're headed into a worldwide system of financial control, digital control. If you look at the book of Revelation, it says that no one could buy or sell without the mark of the beast. I don't think the mark of the beast is here yet. We've seen precursors to it. We saw it during COVID when, in many cases, depending on which country or state you were in, but you couldn't board an airline, go to college, work a job unless you had a vaccine. And I'm close to Boston. Michelle Wu, the mayor of Boston, said you can't even go to a coffee shop unless you've got your vaccine passport. So that was like a beta test for obedience. And we don't have the mark of the beast here yet. It's something that's going to be implanted. In fact, Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I guess I should say, funded a project by Rice School of Bioengineering where they would create a barcode tattoo that be injected as part of a vaccine, and then would have your records in that could be read by a customized smartphone. So we're in Sweden now. There are people who have these RFID chips in there. Jared Kushner is the Kushner family has the head of um, Lucent Technologies, which creates RFID chips.
Mm-hmm.
We're headed towards that. We're not at the Antichrist yet, but I really have to say we're getting very, very close to that. Looking at the degree of globalization, the consolidation of control, the consolidation of the media, even ecumenicism within religion, where they try to combine all religions into one. We're
Mm-hmm.
seeing that from the Vatican now, where they, pay tribute to Islam and Hinduism. um, Everything is coming together in a way that is actually fulfilling prophecy. It is not a purely political matter. I always say that politics are spiritual warfare carried out on the human level.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, but you mentioned who can we trust? Well, I don't trust China. I like Putin. I like the things he said. He said a lot of sensible things about immigration, about Christian values. I've watched his behavior in Orthodox churches. His behavior seems quite humble, and it's hard not to respect the guy. But I also know people have said that he is actually just part of, the whole New World Order system. And if that's the case, then there's no, if that's true, there's no real political escape. There's no place to run to, and that's what they want. Of course, they want worldwide global control. I will pass on giving judgment on Putin right now. He said enough good things that I have some confidence that this guy is not as bad as some people would say he is.
Mm-hmm. I've interviewed a couple of times Riley Wagaman, who wrote with RT Times or RT
Mhm.
in Russia. He's now exited the country, but he lived there for at least 12 years
Mhm.
and was seeing things from the inside. And he firmly believes that Russia is complicit in this global one world government. There's a lot of doublespeak. So RT will put out reports internally that don't match the external reports, but they're trying to give the impression that they're the rebels and they're not cooperating with this one world government and implementing all of this nonsense. But in reality, the agenda there is just the same. They push the vaccine. In fact, they hired AstraZeneca. They contracted it out to AstraZeneca. So
Mhm.
Sputnik is AZ. And they have pushed up the oil prices there to make it impossible. They've been shutting down health clinics to make it impossible to get health care. They're monitoring, surveying. I think they've got a chat, which is like a WhatsApp, which is fully monitored. I can't remember what the app is. So when I talk to Riley Wagaman, I get a really clear picture of absolute corruption, fully aligned with the World Economic Forum. And I think Putin was a young leader with the World Economic Forum.
Was, yes, he was
Yeah,
part of that
yeah.
Young
So
Leaders
I
program.
think
Yeah.
he's a good actor. So it appears that China and Russia are presented like Iran as the enemy, but in reality, they're all moving in lockstep.
Well, Gary Allen, who wrote None Dare Call It Conspiracy, used the analogy of wrestlers. You'd have a good guy wrestler and a bad guy wrestler,
Mhm.
and the crowd would be cheering for one guy and booing the other guy. But at the end of the day, those two wrestlers would go and have a beer with each other. And
Absolutely.
so I think that was a pretty good analogy, and probably is what has actually happened in the world today. Unfortunately, those of us in alt media, when I first became an alt media writer 40 years ago, it was our great hope that we could awaken enough people and get enough people elected to Congress that we could take down the New World Order. But it's today, given the surveillance state we're in, um, and the degree of control and consolidation that's taken place, that does not seem like a realistic option. It seems we're going to have to weather it. We can wake people up, but we don't have any enforcement. People will say arrest Bill Gates. But who's going to do that? Is the Justice Department going to arrest Bill Gates or not? They're as corrupt as Bill Gates. So we're really in a dilemma situation that has been brought upon us. It's not that we aren't intelligent, but it's that there are supernatural forces that have a certain intelligence that goes beyond ours, but their intelligence is still far below God's and that of Christ. And so I feel we're on the cusp of what we call the New World Order. I feel we're on the cusp, but they're probably going to need some major event. Albert Pike, the Satanist, said there would be a third World War that would usher in the age of Luciferianism, and that's maybe what they have in mind. Maybe they want this whole Iran conflict to turn into that ultimately.
Well, it could be a very effective way to perhaps start a nuclear war. But do you have suspicions on nuclear capabilities? Do you
Yep.
actually think there's a lot of talk about nuclear and atomic bombs and everything? Do you think that they even exist?
Um, this is one of those hot points of controversy, and there are a number of them within alternative media. I have a friend named Dave Dionisi. He's an author. He wrote a book called Atomic Bomb Secrets, which I have to say is the best book ever on the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He talked to quite a few Japanese people who witnessed the atomic bomb. And I think there's actually about 10,000 Japanese testimonies on it. I know that there's a claim that the U.S. simply carpet bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that it was no atomic bomb. They just created this as a fear-mongering thing. But then you'd have to swear everybody was on all those bombers to secrecy until death, as well as all the people involved with it, the people who gassed up the planes and the people who gave the orders. They'd all have to be in on it. Plus, you'd have to get all the Japanese people on board to say that there was no atomic bomb and deny that there was deny that there was a carpet bombing. It seems kind of unrealistic to me. And if you look at people like Mordecai Vanunu, the nuclear whistleblower, uh, you know, um, David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel from 1948 to 1963, he quit as prime minister in outrage because President Kennedy had told him to shut down the Dimona nuclear plants where they were building atomic bombs. And Kennedy was flying planes over those. And Gaddafi has said the same thing, that it was over the nuclear bombs that Kennedy was killed. Um, you've got all kinds of witnesses to the atomic bomb tests. You've, I hear this, but I'm not quite convinced that PSYOP isn't the other way around, that the real PSYOP isn't that atomic bombs don't exist. But maybe I'm wrong. Um, the jury's out for me on this, but I do have some suspicions about that particular um, theory. But
Mhm.
then again, my suspicions may be incorrect. This is one of the things that, like a lot of things, it's hard to take a definite position on. And I always feel you have to take an open mind. I've had to change my mind many times on anything. I had a fantastic theory about the Lindbergh kidnapping of 1932. It seemed like a slam dunk that I was right, but this was a long time ago, but I spent 2 years on the Lindbergh kidnapping board, lost a number of arguments, and finally had to say, you know what, my theory, it doesn't hold up. I dropped it. And you have to do that. You have to be like a jury member, And if you ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men, where 11 out of 12 jury members finally reverse their decision
Mm-hmm.
after they really vet the evidence, and you have to do that a lot with these things. Atomic bombs, I'll keep my mind open on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's all I'll say. Yeah.
Well, on that topic, right now there's a lot of talk about aliens. Do
Mhm.
you think this is a perfect distraction?
Um, I think that there's going to be some kind of they've been building up to some kind of alien event. I do believe.
Mhm.
Um, I recently wrote a blog post about the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Most of the sci-fi movies, the outer space movies, like The Queen of Outer Space,
Mhm.
Plan 9 from Outer Space, are really junk movies, are low budget. But the um, The Day the Earth Stood Still was directed by Robert Wise, who also did Sound of Music and West Side Story. Very respected director. They had an expensive cast. They um, Um, they had a lot of features in there, which is kind of creepy. Like the alien could be resurrected, which is kind of taken away from the power of Christ, and the aliens were coming to save us from nuclear weapons. I think it was kind of a degree of predictive programming taking place with that particular movie. Then in the 1970s, they started to make sci-fi a big budget genre with movies like Star Wars, Alien, E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and they've been inundating us with alien movies for a long time. Now I know that you probably heard of Serge Monast and Project Bluebeam.
Mhm.
He said that they're going to fake an alien invasion. On the other hand, I do believe that there are plenty of reliable reports about UFOs and aliens. I once went to a Bible study, and there's a very sincere guy there, sincere Christian. He was an engineer, Vietnam veteran. He was on a bombing mission during the Vietnam War, and he said that a UFO pulled right up next to their aircraft at night. They even could see it on radar. And then that thing just took off after a while, after about 1,000 miles an hour. Just, you know, there are too many reports from airline pilots and reliable people, not just backwoods drunken hicks saying that they saw something in the night. That there's enough to it. Um, I believe, certainly, and I've written an article which is also in my book, 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw, called Making Sense of Supernatural. I certainly believe that the fallen angels, which are described in minor detail in the Bible, but in much greater detail in the books of Enoch, Jubilees, and Jasher, um, that these are not aliens from some advanced civilization galaxies away. They are, in fact, the fallen angels and the demons, and we're dealing with those type of forces. But when they come, they may tell us, like with the day the Earth stood still, we've come to rescue from war and from nuclear war. They may come, like the Antichrist, as some type of savior before they turn their wrath against us.
Fascinating. Well, do you not think that these aliens, these ships could really be US military operatives that are meant to confuse people? Like
That's certainly.
because there's a lot of technologies that we're not perfectly aware of but exist.
Mhm.
So could it be part of the psyop?
uh, it could be, um, but there seems to be evidence going back to ancient times, long before DARPA, that these kind of things were being spotted. Um, I really did an interview with Art Olivier, who made what I consider the best fictionalization of the event of 9/11. It's called Operation Terror. And he has a completely unique theory on the planes of 9/11 that UFOs, you can follow them. They follow what are called ley lines. And there's a ley line that starts in Chapultepec, Mexico, where a slaughter of young Mexican boys were taken. And you follow it to the World Trade Center. Okay. It goes directly through the Pentagon as well as the World Trade Center. It goes through the Goddard Space Center, which is the chief institute for studying um, UFOs, and then right through Logan Airport, right very close to the where the two runways intersected that flights 11 and 175 took off at. It's too much of a coincidence. There's a line that goes from Washington, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. If you follow it across the Atlantic, it goes straight to Stonehenge. These ley lines are pretty magnetic, and right now in China and Japan, they have um, trying to think of the word. It's sort of like Negev, but that's not quite it. But they have trains that travel about 300, 400, 500 miles an hour, and they just go by just like that.
Hmm.
And but they don't even touch the rails. They're following. They're using magnets.
Hmm.
They actually almost virtually fly. And his belief is that from a great many studies, he was, by the way, a former Boeing engineer and McDonnell Douglas engineer. He has a lot of insight into 9/11 and into flight. And he believes that the accuracy of those planes on 9/11, because they all, with the exception of 93, all hit their targets perfectly. First floor of the Pentagon, smack of the middle of the North Tower and just off center of the South Tower, that they were following these ley lines, special aircraft, and that these were designed by the U.S. military,
Hmm.
but using a type of technology that is seen in these UFOs, which does go back a great deal in time. So there may be reverse engineering this technology, or maybe we do hear reports from ufologists that the military is actually working with some of these beings.
Hmm.
So this is again an area of some speculation, but I think it's no question. This new movie I need to research it.
Yes, yes. You know what? I haven't seen it either, but it's called Disclosure Day.
Right,
Yeah, and that's a
right,
Steven Spielberg film,
right,
with the usual roster of, main actors and actresses. I'm very suspicious because here we
right.
go again, as though, oh, now the government is going to tell us the truth on aliens after denying them for, forever. So what do you think? I haven't seen the film, but what do you think?
I sorry, I didn't. I meant to ask AI for the little summary of that film before we did this interview. I didn't get around to it, but there has been recently more disclosure by the government about aliens than ever before.
Hmm.
Plus, I'm sure you've heard about some of these UFO researchers, scientists who've been disappearing. That's been happening too. So they seem to be leading up to the CERN. They seem to be leading up to something happening, and I believe that when Antichrist comes, he will be accompanied by fallen angels who will claim they are aliens to save us
Yeah, I get the feeling
as
that the alien psyop is part of the
mhm.
bigger agenda. You mentioned CERN. You're referring to what happened in Switzerland?
Yes, yeah.
Now the CERN is an epicenter of a lot of this. What's your read on Switzerland as uh, a player in all of this global activity?
I've always protected Switzerland. It's interesting. It's always been neutral, even in
Yeah.
World War II. They protect it. They've got their banks there. It's it seems to be the center of Freemasonry, and it's also where the Zionist congresses of Theodor Herzl were held. It's kind of a weird the um, ceremonies attached to CERN have also been really weird.
Yeah. I
And
watched some of the footage of that
yeah,
ceremony, and it was kind of in a tunnel. Uh,
right,
there was an opening, I think, of a tunnel, and it was so satanic. I
right,
thought, aren't people disturbed when they see this? Because to me, it was blatantly evil.
mm,
But
right.
I
They
found
say
it
they're
all to be
searching for
very
the
odd.
yeah, they say they're searching for the God particle,
Hmm.
and it sounds like they're into opening portals to the
Hmm.
supernatural and things like
Into
that.
the
And
underworld. And
yeah,
no, it was extremely dark, extremely dark. So, what are the rabbit holes that have been created to be a good distraction?
you mean like fake stuff
Well,
to
yeah, what are the rabbit holes that you think we shouldn't waste our time on? Like flat Earth, or are there some rabbit holes that have been intentionally created to distract us from what's really going on?
um yes, I would certainly say so. Well, they've always tried to distract us with paltry stuff. One is sports. Um, another is entertainment of various kinds on television and movies, and the movies never tell you the truth, although they may throw in little predictive programming. That's one way they distract us. Some of these things like are nukes real, flat Earth, things like that. There are arguments on both sides, and I tend not to want to get into those too much because
Hmm.
the jury is kind of out on, you hear arguments both ways, but I have no doubt that they have tried to involve us in things that will take us in an incorrect direction so that their real plan will not become our focus.
Yeah. Do you feel like their agenda is on track? Like 2030, I would agree with you. They are, they've been quite open about 2030 being a very important year. Do you think everything's on schedule?
Yeah. I think probably sometimes they get a little setback. The Deagle forecast, which
Mm.
you're probably familiar with.
I That was very daunting. That's used for insurance companies.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they predicted in 2015 that Britain and Ireland would lose more than 70% of their population. The United States would go down, I think about, yeah, maybe high 60%, and the rest of
Mhm.
Western Europe would go down maybe 48%. Um, and yet that didn't happen in 2015. So it looks like they kind of missed, and maybe they've had to rearrange things a little bit. So I think sometimes they do fall behind schedule, but I think they are still shooting for 2030.
So the Deagle report, I looked at that with great suspicion because I thought, has this been put out again to, um, well, not as a distraction, but it's like, oh, look at this. Who created that Deagle report, and how legitimate is it? It seemed odd.
Right. It had a lot of us concerned,
Hmm.
and I felt they were going to implement it in 2015, and they didn't. I'm sorry, 2025. I shouldn't
2025,
say
right? Hmm.
2025, not 2015. So they're at least behind schedule, and whether or not that is a realistic forecast, I don't know. But one reason why we attached significance to it was we knew that the deep state, whether they're talking about Ted Turner, World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, David Rockefeller were always obsessed with depopulation. The Georgia Guidestones talking about reducing world population to 500 million. World Economic Forum has been talking about that for a long time. So it was real enough, the depopulation agenda, to believe that there could be um, truth to the Deagle forecast, even though it didn't
Hmm.
come true in the time frame that they forecast.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Kissinger used to talk a lot about
Mhm.
depopulation, and uh, there's no question that they're hyper focused on that. But interestingly, they never suggest themselves as being ones that should be removed.
They never volunteer.
No, no. So I'm curious to know about your thoughts on Germany because I get the sense that the deep state is threatened by Germany, by a strong Germany. Do you get that sense at all? I always feel like Germany's being not suppressed, but the Germans are such hard workers and they're so industrious, and yet I feel like they're being sabotaged all the time. Do you have any view on Germany?
Well, just to expand for a moment, they seem to have an agenda against the whole white race. And I think that one of the reasons for that is that in terms of achievement, in terms of opposition to the deep state goals, the white races would stand out in their minds. And that is why there has been such an attack, this whole white privilege thing, and
Mhm.
anything under the sun um, that's white is to be attacked. It reached absurd proportions. But in terms of Germany, um, I think we really have to go back in time on that one because I think that there was tremendous invective leveled against Germany in the First and Second World Wars. They were certainly misrepresented in the First World War as world conquerors. They made a movie um, in the United States called um, something like the Battle Plan for Peace. It was that's not quite it, but it came out in 1915. It showed the Germans invading New York City and molesting the young damsels of New York City. And the fact of the matter is they couldn't have invaded America. They were blocked into the North Sea for the whole war by the Royal Navy, which is really the only ships they could get with their U-boats. That was it. They weren't going to come over here and invade us. But there was always this invasion scare. And during World War II, or in the years leading up to it, there was an invasion scare. The Germans were going to invade us. Well, Charles Lindbergh made hash of that. He said, listen, if they try to invade us, they don't have a single aircraft carrier. They couldn't invade us without air support. Our land-based if they try to come over and invade us, our land-based air force would just go over and bomb the smithereens. The whole thing about we'd always be speaking German now if the Germans didn't, um, uh, if we didn't stop Germany. They had no plan for world conquest. And I can tell you right now, having studied dozens of memoirs of German soldiers and people who lived in Germany at that time, they had no intention of a war with England and France. The only reason they had a war with England and France because England and France declared war on them. And when a nation, other countries declare war, you have to fight them. But
Hmm.
they defeated France in about a month, and they sent the British home at the beaches of Dunkirk. They thought the war was over because just like World War One, they figured that um, when the war's over on the continent, the war's over. But Churchill, who was under the control of something called the focus group, which is described in detail by David Irving, continued with long-range bombing of Germany, which had not been available in World War One. So he kept World War Two going, um, and the Germans were not concerned with France and England. They were concerned with the Soviet Union. And that's why Operation Barbarossa, which started on June the 22nd, 1941, contrary to what you get from movies, was not just the Germans, it was the Finns and the Croats and the Hungarians and the Romanians and the Italians and the Austrians and Spanish volunteers and Belgian volunteers. And what were they doing? They're trying to, all those countries trying to conquer the world? No, they wanted to get rid of communism because they'd seen what communism had done to the churches, how it had brutally murdered millions of people in Russia. They saw that the people had been murdered in Spain until Franco finally got rid of them. And so that was a unified European effort to take out communism. But the whole blame all fell on Germany. And of course, they've been castigated as world conquerors ever since that time. So, yeah, they definitely had a grudge against the Germans as a military force and a resilient people that could stand up to their plan for a internationalist New World Order.
Hmm.
Germany pulled out of the League of Nations. They didn't want that. They wanted to just be their own country. And it became very prosperous before the war broke out, unlike the 1920s when it had been harassed by the terms of the um, uh, Paris Peace Conference. Um, and it was on the way up and it had to be taken care of. So yeah, they've had a long-term grudge against people of Germany. Now, of course, they're trying to destroy Germany along with the rest of Europe through massive illegal immigration, destroying the character of those countries, which, by the way, if you really look at it, it's a reversal of God's original plan after the Tower of Babel. He divided the nations into different nations with their own cultures, their own languages, and all of that is being torn down by the satanic global state. And that's what the European Union was all about, consolidating them under one power and then bringing in the immigrants who are unjustified wars in the Middle East help to provoke, right? Bringing them into Europe. That is all part of their long-term plan to bring the world under domination.
I think we see this attempt in North America for sure. We have our
Right.
doors are wide open. And ultimately, I look at it as an attempt to destroy nationalism. We're
Right.
destroying Canada and everything that Canada is. We are being told there is no Canadian identity. That was something that
Oh,
Trudeau would say repeatedly. What is Canada? There is no. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. There is a Canadian identity, but
right.
it's a mess here in Canada, and you can really see how it's destroying the country.
Yeah, it's a mess in the United States as well. It's the same plan in Europe. Um, there is definitely a plan to take down white Christian civilization, which they see as the foremost barrier to the deep state's globalist intentions.
So how do you see this in the US with the immigrant this
Oh,
policy to destroy the US and Trump's reaction to it all? What's your read in the US as to what's going on?
it's the same thing. They
Mhm.
want to destroy national identities. Trump seems to be softening his stand about expelling all these millions of illegal immigrants that came in under Biden. They're getting rid of a few criminals, but I hear so many stories and I see so much on social media about women being raped, crimes being committed. In the meantime, here in Massachusetts, taxes are going up. We have a lesbian governor who inherited the state from a Republican government. We had a surplus under the Republican. Now we have a deficit, largely because so much money is being going to luxury accommodations for these illegals. And I know personally people who had to move out of their neighborhoods because they built these housing complexes for the illegals, and the legals are centers of crime and drug dealing, and people have to move away to get away from it. So we're suffering under that too. It might be at a different level than in Canada, but it's certainly the same plan as is taking place in Europe and in Canada.
So what's your read on Trump? I know that's a loaded question, but in a
It, you know,
nutshell,
I,
uh,
I, well, I voted for him. Obviously nobody wanted Kamala Harris, a scatterbrain to be running the White House, but he lied to the American people. I wanted to play this clip for you about things he said. Um, it's got literally dozens of statements by Trump saying he would never start a war, never fight a war in the Middle East. In fact, wait a minute. There's one that I didn't have in that clip. I'm just going to read it to you. This is a tweet
yes,
by Trump,
yes.
and he said this in 2019. The United States has spent $8 trillion fighting and policing in the Middle East. Thousands of our great soldiers have died or been badly wounded. Millions of people have died on the other side. Going into the Middle East is the worst decision ever made, unquote, Donald Trump. Now he made countless statements like that. He said, I'm not going to start a war. I have on my new YouTube channel, I have um, a video called The Repugnant War in Iran. It's got that clip of all the statements Trump made on video saying he would never start a war. I'll be the president of peace. It's got tweets from him condemning Obama, saying, not that I'm a fan of Obama, of course, but he's condemning Obama, saying he's going to start a war with Iran. And he's saying in 2020, he's saying, why are we fighting in the Middle East? We should be building our roads and our schools and our hospitals. It's so stupid. And then he does, what did he do? He starts a war in the Middle East. And, Benjamin Netanyahu has been pushing that for ages. Um, I probably pushed his book out of the way here. Um, um, well, I don't want to tie up your
No,
audience while
no,
I
that's fine.
I look for it.
Hmm.
But oh, wait a minute, here it is. Benjamin Netanyahu, Fighting Terrorism, 1995. Now, he's got a chapter in here, and it's 1995, 31 years ago. It's called the Specter of Nuclear Terrorism, and he says, if the Islamic Republic of Iran succeeded in acquiring non-conventional weapons, even nuclear, the best estimates at this time place Iran between 3 and 5 years away from possessing the prerequisites required for the independent production of nuclear weapons. And he goes on like that, saying how America must stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. This is 1996. I'm saying 1995, 31 years ago. What's the difference? Iran did not attack us. It didn't threaten us. It was minding its own business. The Strait of Hormuz was open until Trump attacked. The only thing that changed between 1995 and 2026 is the Epstein files. Those were hanging over Trump's head, and he caved in and he went to war. I want to point out that this war against Iran was illegal under U.S. law. Under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, only Congress has the right to start a war. He didn't consult Congress. He just started bombing. He just started the war. There is something called the War Powers Act of 1973. Now, that act was designed to limit the president, not empower him. It said the president can only start a war if there's an imminent threat. Was there an imminent threat from Iraq? There was not. They were not threatening us. There was no evidence they had a nuclear bomb. In fact, Tulsi Gabbard, she's gone now, but she testified to Congress that there's no evidence they have one. Um, and if they did have one, they don't have the long range capability to send one against the United States. So this was an unprovoked war out of nowhere that's costing us billions of dollars per day. I know that, as we're recording this on the 17th, supposedly on the 19th, an agreement is going to be signed, but Netanyahu will have no trouble disrupting that because um, part of Iran's stipulation is that they have to withdraw from Lebanon. Netanyahu has already said he's not going to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
And
So there's going to
all they
be a
have to do
hiccup.
is,
There's going to be a
yeah,
hiccup. And then is
yeah.
everyone going to blame Israel?
Well, I think that the way the U.S. media will do it, since they're under the control of the same forces as Congress, is they'll characterize it as an Iranian violation.
Mm,
If Netanyahu attacks Iran or Lebanon in the midst of these negotiations, then um, if the United States re-enters the conflict, which is very possible, um, then Trump will certainly come down on the side of Israel, as he always has in his
yeah.
first administration and throughout the second administration.
So it feels as though anti-Semitism is almost being encouraged here.
Um, well, a lot of people, I'm half Jewish myself. A lot of people um, have been encouraged towards an sort of anti-Semitic view,
Mm-hmm.
simply that they realistically see that Israel attacked the West many times. They blew up the King David Hotel in 1946, killing 91 people to get the British to move out so they could declare the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They, the Lavon affair of 1954, they tried to blow up British and um, American facilities in Egypt, and that plan backfired. The bombs blew up on themselves. They didn't get away with that one. They attacked the USS Liberty in 1967, killing 34, wounding over 170, and that whole story was suppressed. They tried to claim it was mistaken identity, but we know from the intercepted ground-to-air communications, they knew it was an American ship. It was flying the American flag. And when they shot down the American flag, the sailors launched another American flag, which the Israelis shot down. It was definitely an attack. Again, the Labelle Disc attack, 1986. Reagan bombed Libya, thinking that Libya had committed a terrorist act uh, against U.S. servicemen at this disc attack. And in fact, those messages which American intelligence intercepted were Israeli transmissions from a transmitter they planted in Libya in Tripoli. And that was revealed by Viktor Ostrovsky, former Mossad officer, in his book, The Other Side of Deception. In 1994, according to Annie Machin, former MI5 officer, the Israelis detonated a bomb outside of their embassy in England. Didn't kill anyone, but it was blamed on Palestinians. Why? Because England was getting friendly with Palestine. And then if you go to 9/11 and you look at all the Israeli fingerprints on that, starting with the dancing Israelis, they've committed acts of terror against the United States continuously, and they've gotten away with it. And the dancing Israelis were let go by Michael Chertoff, whose mother happened to be Mossad.
Yeah, yeah.
They've
So
got
what?
such
So what?
control. Yeah.
So when you look at Trump, who's behind him? Okay? So the Zionists are controlling him. Who's controlling Trump? And what is his overarching desire or agenda?
Well, I think most people agree he's kind of an egotist, and I think he'd like to be able to declare himself a winner. I saw something on social media, and I thought maybe it was an exaggeration. Um, it said Trump has stated 55 times that he defeated Iran. Trump has stated 35 times that Iran is destroyed. Trump has stated 38 times that a deal is imminent. Trump has stated 25 times that the Strait of Hormuz is open. Now, I thought maybe that's an exaggeration, but then I saw Judge Napolitano and other respected figures giving those very similar figures on Trump. So he has continually lied. And this war was not America first. All these regime changes in Venezuela, Cuba, um, in Iran. It originally said we're going to create regime change in Iran. That didn't work out. Now he's denying it's about regime change. I think he's a little confused. I think he got sucked in to a certain extent by Bibi on this, but certainly the Epstein files were, being used as a prod to get him to start this war. And, he said it's going to be at the beginning, in March 11th, he said the war was already won. Obviously, it wasn't. We've been humiliated by Iran knocking out our missiles with their,
Hmm.
or there are missiles failing to intercept their multiple inexpensive drones. Um, so Trump is being um, pushed by the Zionists in America. I understand from reports on Israeli News Live, which is a significant YouTube channel. They have over 400,000 subscribers that YouTube admits to, but it's run by Stephen and Yana Ben Noon. And Stephen
Oh.
used to live in Israel. He's got a lot of
Mhm.
intelligence contacts in Israel. He says that the Iranians, via the Chinese, now have the goods on Trump as well regarding the Epstein files. They can release them as well. But the problem is the Iranians don't have power over American media, but the Zionists do. And if they release the files, they could get Trump in a lot of trouble. If CNN and CNBC and the rest of the networks started exposing him in the Epstein files, he's done, obviously. He'd be forced to resign. So he's really in a tough position. And I have a feeling this war is going to keep going because as long as they've got the goods on Trump, they can continue to compel him to do their bidding. And, I mentioned the War Powers Act. The war is illegal. It's definitely a legal war
Mhm.
under national and international law. Under international law, you can only start a war in the matter of self-defense. This was not self-defense. It was an unprovoked, unjustified war on behalf of Israel. And so, since Israel's not satisfied with this latest peace agreement, I think it's going to fall through. It may be signed on Friday. I don't know.
Mhm.
But if it's signed, there are plenty of ways to disrupt it and
Mhm.
prevent it from being fulfilled. So I think that the war is going to continue. And I also have to say that they are using the war to make the stock market go up and down. You're a financial
Oh,
expert.
the manipulation and the
Yeah.
financial gain that Trump and his family are benefiting from here
Mhm.
is epic.
Yeah.
But
All
yeah.
the shorting of oil before Trump makes a negative announcement, or they'll go, I'm sorry, going long on oil before it makes, but if it makes a positive announcement, they'll short oil because the oil price is going to go down. So, yeah, that's par for the course in Washington. We've seen Nancy Pelosi and other congressmen doing all kinds of insider trading, and it
Mhm.
seems it's no different with the allies of the Trump administration.
So do you see Trump as just being a puppet then of the deep state and he's doing their bidding?
Trump fans won't like me for saying it. Again, I did vote for Trump, but
Hmm.
I do believe he's a puppet. I
Hmm.
believe he's not his own man, and I believe that he will continue to. I did an article on his first administration, which listed out year by year all the things he did on behalf of Iran. I'm sorry, on behalf of Israel, whether it was you know, attacking Syria twice with cruise missiles over non-existent chemical weapons attacks allegedly committed by Assad, killing General Soleimani, declaring Trump declared that the Golan Heights now belong to Israel as if he had the right to give one country's territory to another country,
Hmm.
moving the capital, Israel or embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That's all part of the Third Temple plot.
Yeah.
Um, Before he became president, he made TV commercials for Israeli television advocating people to vote for Bibi Netanyahu. He's under Netanyahu's thumb, it's clear. And I know yesterday, as we're taping this, he made a few critical remarks about Netanyahu not wanting to give up his invasion of Lebanon, but I think that's all theater. His actions over the course of two administrations have shown clearly he is a Zionist puppet. And even before he became president in his second term, I did an article, went through his entire cabinet picks, Hegseth, Vance, um, Elise Stefanik was his original choice for UN ambassador. Um, uh, Pam Bondi is now gone as AG. There's a lot of the Trump
Hmm.
used to,
Hmm.
there's his musical chairs all the time, but everybody, Mike Waltz, um, Besant, Ludnick, everybody in a key position, Kash Patel, Ratcliffe at CIA, every one of them is a hardcore Zionist, anti-Iranian. I looked at his cabinet before he became president. I said, this is a war cabinet. This is a Zionist cabinet. And so he hasn't changed. He's not being his own man. If he did, he'd be appointing more people who were completely opposed to Zionism, but he's not. It's not a diverse cabinet. It's a Zionist cabinet. And it's a cabinet that would certainly keep this war going. I haven't seen one cabinet member, including Trump himself, ever express sympathy for the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who've been killed in Gaza. It's not feeling sorry for them is not even on their plate. You know, it's clearly he's in that camp. He's
Yeah.
there to stay.
Well, and interestingly, Riley Wagaman has pointed out that Trump also is very cozy with the Zionists in Russia and the oligarchs in Russia. He goes
Mhm.
way back with them. If you go for a deep dive on Trump and Russia and all the leaders
Mhm.
there, he's very cozy with them as well. So it's fascinating. He's an interesting character. Certainly keeps us all, well, I don't want to say entertained because it's not entertaining, but he's certainly uh, he's a spectacle. But in Canada, he's been quite interesting because we watched what happened in Venezuela. Now he's threatening Cuba. He's talking about Greenland. He's even talking about Canada. And I can't help but wonder, he's is this a precursor to the technate? And
What?
Elon Musk's grandfather. Well, Elon Musk's grandfather was actually jailed in Canada. He was a real rabble rouser and was talking about this plan of a technate, which is a union of all of North America, Canada, right down Alaska, Canada, the U.S., Mexico, and I feel as though the way Trump has been talking as a Canadian,
Mhm.
I think, is he obsessed with this idea of forming the technate, which is yet another union, a little bit like what we see in Europe?
In my book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, I talked about the how NAFTA was intended to turn into a North American Union the same
Mm,
way that the common market turned into the European Union.
yes.
You started as an economic alliance and you became a political alliance. That was rejected. The North American Union was rejected because people like Ron Paul and other people, especially down around Texas and our southern border, were not in favor of a union, political union with Mexico. But
Hmm.
that has long been their plan. Robert Pastor of the Council on Foreign Relations wrote a number of articles calling for uh, a continent-wide homeland security force, things like that. But there's something very interesting about Canada and Greenland. I wrote an article on this early in Trump's administration. The Club of Rome, which is an internationalist think tank, back in 1973, they created a map of 10 international regions, which would be the building blocks of the New World Order. And for North America, they envisioned Greenland, Canada, and the United States being one of those 10 regional states. So Trump is trying to characterize the absorption of Canada and Greenland as a make America great and it's nationalistic when in fact it's globalistic. This is an old global plan that's over 50 years old to combine the United States with Canada and Greenland. They want ultimate consolidation in the end, but they have to boil the frog. They can't get all the countries to combine at once. So you create regional alliances. That's what the European Union was about. The European Union was a stepping stone, a regional government on the path to global government.
Hmm.
And Trump is just step in lockstep with that when he talks about absorbing Canada and
Yeah.
Greenland. It's part of the globalist plan,
So
not a nationalist Americanist plan.
that's right. So I look as a Canadian across the border, and I think this is the ultimate game. I think this is the end game for him, is to facilitate the merger of or facilitate this whole agenda.
Right.
And I look at our leader, Mark Carney, as facilitating completely destroying our country, destabilizing
Mhm.
it, open borders, destroy nationalism, destroy our economy very effectively, to the point that a lot of Canadians may say, that's okay, let's join the US. It might be although he says, Mark Carney's always saying, no, no, we need to forge tighter alliance with Europe. That's ridiculous. We can't join the EU, which he talks as though he'd like to see it. But I think ultimately, I look at the end game as Mark Carney's trying to destroy Canada and make it a
Mhm.
perfect takeover candidate for the US. That's what it
Um,
appears.
sh- sure, I could certainly believe that. Um,
Hmm.
uh, Unfortunately, our quote unquote elected officials do not have our interest at heart. They are working for the deep state backers that they have. And so, I gave you that list of the evil things that they're doing to us, all the poisons that they're giving us, the vaccines, the lockdowns, limiting our freedoms. They're doing everything they can to destroy our countries in preparation for their ultimate New World Order.
Yeah. Do you know anything about Mark Carney aside from his position head of the world, well, he was the head of our central bank and the UK's central bank, member of all these things, Bilderberg. I think he's in the Trilateral Commission. Is he
Mhm.
part of Trilateral or part of
I
the
don't know enough
council?
about Mark Carney. I'm
Oh yeah.
sorry. I don't know enough about him. Yeah.
He's definitely a UN man. I think they call him the Tsar in the UN. I think his role before he became our prime minister was associated with the UN Green Agenda. So
Sure.
yeah, so he's a
Very
UN
believable.
guy, and they call him in Europe. They call him Davos man because he does not miss a meeting at the World Economic Forum, and
Wow.
yeah, so
Okay.
he's a dangerous character, but very smart. But in terms of comparing him to Trudeau, who he was the puppet master for Trudeau, but Trudeau was not a big threat. But Mark Carney is smart and has convinced a good many Canadians that he has our back. So
Sure. When you get the media on your side, you can convince people that what you're doing is very positive. And
mhm.
if there's a union between the United States and Canada, they'll couch that in terms that will be very positive sounding to Canadians, so they'll go along with it.
Yeah,
Um, just as, they tried to, they said that the COVID vaccine was, um, safe and effective, which it wasn't, but they'll lie to attract people to follow their agenda.
yeah. Now, tell me a little bit about Thomas Massey, because that was an interesting to watch, tragic in one level. Did you trust Thomas Massey?
Sure.
Yeah, he
Um,
seemed
he
trustworthy. Hmm.
He wanted to open up the Epstein files. He was an opponent. He was not on the payroll of AIPAC, one of the few congressmen who is not. And as you probably know, the Adelsons poured millions of dollars into the Kentucky district where he was running for re-election to get him out.
Yeah.
And he was kind of, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was an excellent congresswoman, had left for basically the same reasons. Disillusionment with Trump, all the things he was doing that were not in accord with his vision for a greater America. And Thomas Massey, he recently um, got together with some of the veterans of USS Liberty, and he wants an investigation opened there. He's a good guy. One of the few really, like Ron Paul, one of
Yeah.
the few good guys in Congress, somebody that you could really represents the people and not deep state interest.
So, are there many good characters like this out there, or do you think they one by one are blackmailed, threatened, bribed?
I think they're getting closer and closer to consolidation of the Congress. I'm sure there's still a few other good, Senator Kennedy from, I believe it's from Louisiana, is a pretty independent guy, and there are a few others, but not many. They're in the minority, the ones who are not owned by APAC.
So, historical figures, you just wrote about Lincoln, right? Or no,
Mhm.
yeah, not just wrote a couple of years ago. But are there looking historically, are there any leaders that you look back and think that was a good leader who was taken down? Or are there many historical figures that you look at the history and respect?
Um, well, the further back in time, probably the more respect that I would give to people. I would give a lot of respect to some of the monarchs who have been overthrown by Freemasonic revolutions. Um, Here in America, Um, you know, uh, President Kennedy certainly had his faults, but he did go against the Zionist lobby. He and his brother wanted AIPAC registered as a foreign agent. Um, Kennedy was a good man in many respects. Um, I've um, uh, I've written an article on this, but the project I'm working on right now is a video about who really wrote the Declaration of Independence. And I have to say that although our patriots in America um, honor and respect what we call our founding fathers, and I certainly respect George Washington, but there was a lot of occultism and a lot of Freemasonry tied up with the American Revolution. And I have to say that at the end of the day, when you back up and look at what really happened in America was when the New World was discovered, there was a lot of rejoicing among the dark secret societies because they felt this was a lost continent of Atlantis. And um, in fact, Francis Bacon called America Atlantis. um, they exploited the monarchies of Europe, the Netherlands, France, um, Spain, England, to settle the New World. But then they drove out the French with the French and Indian War, and as soon as that war was over, bang, they set their sights on driving out the British, and they made the Western Hemisphere monarchy free. And the reason that the Rothschilds wanted the world to be monarchy free is because they couldn't intermarry into those bloodlines very easily, so they had to be overthrown. And so once the monarchies were out of the New World, and the Spanish-American War, of course, put the finishing touches on Spain, 1898. Then they concentrated on overthrowing the monarchies in their own country. So the King of France is gone, the King of Spain is gone, the King of Italy, they're all gone. The English monarchy is still there, but that's because they cooperate. But where's the Kaisers of Germany? Where are the czars of Russia? Where's the Emperor of China? They're all gone because they couldn't intermarry into those bloodlines. So they created democracies and republics and socialist and communist states because they could control those. The Rothschilds owned Reuters, and if you own Reuters, you control international information. And when you control
Mm.
information through your control of newspapers, then you can control who people will vote for, and you'll always get your man running the country. That's why they had to take down the monarchies. We'll look at the broad picture here.
Yeah, yeah.
So most of the world leaders over the past, couple hundred years, I wouldn't have high regard for. I think there have been a few good ones in small countries, that haven't been under the thumb of the New World Order, but most of them have bowed to it, I would have to say.
Yeah. And currently, are there any world leaders that you have confidence in?
But I
Or
told you I like the things that Putin
you'd
says,
like to
even
think,
though he's probably is a player in this, but I like
yeah,
what he said about Christianity and about Western values and the pedophiles running the
yeah,
West, things like that. He said a lot of good things.
yeah.
It doesn't mean that's really what he means, but
No,
he sounds awfully
it
good.
certainly is a propaganda campaign that was quite
Mhm.
effective.
Right.
They're subsidizing families that have lots of children. But so there is this contradiction in
Mhm.
Russia, which I think has made people think as though, oh, is Russia different? But in my research, it's
Mhm.
as dark, if not darker. I think of Africa. I don't know if you ever poked around in Africa to look at the monarchies there that have been destabilized. Have you ever studied Africa at all? Because that traditionally is they're run by monarchies that have been destroyed.
I haven't spent as much time on Africa, but certainly they probably were less concerned about Africa because of its poverty. They certainly would want its natural resources to exploit, and it seems they have been involved in toppling leaders in Africa who would be replaced by someone who would take loans from the World Bank and who would um, um, take national resources and turn them over to the World Bank in exchange for loans, things of that
Mhm.
nature. You probably heard of the book Economic Hitman, the way these people operate in these countries. I think that Africa has been probably a less of a concern for them because it doesn't represent a particularly powerful threat to the New World Order's interest,
Hmm.
being generally a very poor continent.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
found it fascinating that the onset of COVID, there were several African leaders who spoke out and said they were not going to follow suit, and they knocked them off.
Right. There were people who worked to expel the World Health Organization
Yeah.
and who exposed the falsehoods of COVID. And actually, it's interesting that not that many people in Africa were vaccinated, and yet they had no big COVID problem down there.
No,
They didn't
miraculously.
sweep the continent. Yeah.
Yes. So, with all of this, uh, do you have any hope? I mean, you did kind of allude to the fact that you think this is like a freight train. We're not going to be able to change the course of history here. Um, with that in mind, do you have any hope, or how do you think we should be navigating?
Do you mind if we break for just 1 minute here, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
you could edit it out? I just need to take.
Okay. So, yes, my question was, is there hope? And what would be what would be your focus going forward now for the general populace?
Um, as I mentioned before. when I started out in alt media 40 years ago, our hope was to overthrow this New World Order. I don't see that happening now, not in a digital ID era of surveillance, especially. Um, it looks like we are coming up on the time of the Antichrist. And, you know, is the New World Order satanic? I mean, just look at Bohemian Grove, or if you're familiar with uh, who was the Dutch banker? Um, there was a Dutch banker who was one of the leading bankers in Europe. He went public about the Satanism that is practiced by the global elite. I'm forgetting his name at this moment, but it, it looks like the Antichrist is on his way, and the Antichrist is somebody we can't vote out of power. Um,
Hmm.
so it looks like biblical prophecy is actually coming to pass, and so our hope is beyond the Antichrist. He is not a permanent figure. It's not like George Orwell said in 1984, a boot stomping on the face of humanity forever. That's not going to happen. His reign is 3.5 years, and then it's over. It's finite. The rule of Christ is infinite, and he is definitely on the way. So I think the thing to be doing is, for those who are Christians, is to be looking ahead beyond this. Certainly, there's a certain amount of physical prepping that should be done for this new world order. Whether it's stocks of food and water, or means of self-defense, or hard assets, or maybe moving away from cities where things may be tougher than in the country. Things of this nature, typical prepper type actions. They are again trying to poison in so many ways. It's hard to even keep up with what's going on. But that is our great hope, and that's the hope of Christians is that in the aftermath of the reign of the Antichrist, who certainly seems to be very close at this point, I would have to say that uh, in the meantime we obey God and obey His commandments and prepare for the life to come.
Yeah. Which of the threats against us in your mind are the most ominous? I mean,
Have to
sometimes
renew.
they're
Oh,
all rather nasty, but I think of, the chemtrail issue. It's
mm,
hard to battle that because you think, my goodness, this is happening. You can see they're dispersing chemicals up there. We don't have much say in it. It's a lot easier to say no thank you to a vaccine, but
mm,
when
right.
they're spraying chemicals, it feels, or EMF, that there's just all of these towers going up. You feel uh, in some ways we're kind of helpless.
Right, and that's one reason I say that this is spiritual forces at work. I don't think any human being is smart enough to put together this network of evil that we are witnessing take place. There's certainly a cleverness to it, for sure. I'm sort of lost my track of what you were asking.
Oh, just, how, looking forward, how should we navigate? So as Christians, you say, yeah, focus on some practicalities, uh,
Mhm.
and perhaps that may involve where you live, how you go about your life, making some
Mhm.
choices, what type of
Sure.
assets you're in. Um, but beyond that, there is how would I say, it does feel that we can't, I would agree with you. I don't think that we can reverse this. It seems inevitable.
Right. So I think we're going to go through a period of biblical prophecy upcoming. And I think no one can go wrong by prayer or getting right with God. If you're Catholic or Orthodox, going to confession, obeying God's commandments, um, simple things like humility, um, forgiveness, very things that Jesus Christ spoke of, we should be doing.
Hmm.
And because we need to look, whether there's a new world order coming or not, every person of every generation going back thousands of years has had to deal with um, how they work their life and whether they're obedient to God, and what is their the birth of Christ on the day of judgment. So that's nothing new, but this is a particularly perilous time where those qualities will be especially important, I think, for people to be aware of and to try to follow, especially with so much demonic oppression and so much misrepresentation of Christianity, and the difficulties people have in finding out um, the nature of God, being taught Darwinism and being told that um, uh, Christians are stupid, stick in the muds, don't believe in science, things like that, you know.
Mhm.
So there's a campaign that is kind of unprecedented right now. But again, being close to God, obeying His commandments, you can't go wrong with that, along with the physical proper part.
Yeah, it does feel as though there's a complete inversion of what we have been told is diametrically opposed to what reality is or what truth is. And uh, I'm stunned by the extent of it right now. The extent of deception. I'm also stunned by uh, the lack of awareness that so many people have. Are you surprised that a lot of people seem to be oblivious as to what's going on?
During COVID, that really showed through, didn't it? Some of us knew from day one that this was a psyop, but other people just went along. The majority of people were still depending on mainstream media news and Dr. Fauci for their information.
Hmm.
And you were either in the matrix or out of it. You were either red pilled or you were blue pilled, pretty much. Although
Yeah.
I'm sure there are degrees in between on that score. Um, But to say that I've seen so many people who are blue pilled that I'm not surprised at what's going on today, that there aren't more people that are awake. And this is always a great challenge and frustration. One frustration is that we don't get the type of companionship with people who are similarly awake that we can interact with. So we have to find our own niche, our own groups that do understand the truth. The majority of people, unfortunately, I think some people say it's partly the fluoride and the other chemicals that are kind of dumb in the vaccines that are dumbing people down. Um, and all we can do to wake people up is to continue to tell them the truth and try to find the most effective ways possible. Always found that, um, I try to produce books that have pictures for to keep people's interest, that have an index for usability, and that have um, end notes for documentation, and that helps to convince people. And if you can present enough information concisely, it can sometimes reach people and make a difference, especially if they also tune into other uh, media opportunities. And one good thing is we do have the internet. It does provide search engines, and even though those are often um, twisted to prevent us from finding out the truth, if you know the right people to follow, whether it's Whitney Webb or the Corbett Report or Henry Macko or uh, dozens and dozens of
Yeah.
other,
You
uh,
have to, I'm finding in the alternative media space, you need to be more discerning now. It, it,
right,
it
yeah,
there definitely
I,
is a sense that the alt media has been hijacked as well.
right. They
So,
would not neglect that. They would never neglect to hijack the alt media. And so accusations get rolled back, and you don't always know what's true or not. I tend not to accuse anyone of being a shill unless I have some definite evidence,
yeah,
or
yeah,
you follow a person's pattern and you see that they've contradicted themselves in many ways,
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it is very difficult, especially like I say, the censorship that is experienced by us. If you're being censored, it's a pretty indication that you're not part of the New World Order.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I have found whenever I post on YouTube, usually within minutes, my videos are deleted. So I haven't had any success with YouTube. It's
I only started my YouTube channel 3 months ago, and the reason I did it is I found that a number of people on YouTube were not getting censored, who were taking really um, positions that normally would have been censored. So I thought, oh, I'll give it a shot. I do have a BitChute channel, which I really haven't used much, but I thought I'd give it YouTube a shot. So far, I've been okay, but you never know when
Oh,
they're going to strike
lucky
it down.
you. Well, I don't
Yeah.
know what there maybe are some keywords that I'm saying, or I don't know, but I don't have any luck with YouTube. Uh,
Well, I think they're not worried about me because I just started 3 months ago, and I only have about a little over 500 followers, so I don't have
oh, okay, they're
the
not onto you yet. Give it
yeah.
time.
So I'm not much of a threat right now.
Not yet.
So,
Not
but
yet.
yeah, but when I
No.
reached 26,000 followers on Twitter about 5 years ago, that's when they shut me down, and they would only allow about 100 to 200 views per tweet, where they should have been getting thousands.
Well,
And
it's
yeah,
amazing how many people still bother with Twitter because I was shut down 3 times on Twitter as well.
wow.
I had an account, shut it down, another account, shut it down. But It's remarkable. I mean, once they made that announcement that you will have freedom of reach, but not, no, freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach, that was a
And then the
very
acronym.
telling comment. So, yes, you're in a silo. You can say whatever you want, but the shadow banning is a very effective muzzle.
Right.
And so I don't bother with Twitter either. I think all of the platforms worry me. Even Substack, it feels like we've been corralled into a platform that they're messing with now. It seems as though people are having a lot of issues with Substack.
Right. I just
Yeah.
heard a few people complaining about that on Substack. Yeah, I think that there are very few platforms that they don't really have their hands on right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So getting the truth, they make it harder and
Yeah,
harder. Yeah.
it's tricky. And I'm on Telegram, but I have had so many people reach out to me and say, why did you remove me from your channel? It's like, well, why would I do that? It even happened to
Yeah.
my husband. So they're obviously plucking out, they just kind of pull out, subscribers and they just remove you. So I don't, I really, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get information out, but you have to keep trying.
Yeah. When I was on the first week on YouTube, right, I had like 150 subscribers, and um, I was just working in what they call YouTube Studio, and I noticed I lost suddenly one of my subscribers went down from 162 to 161. And oh well, somebody unsubscribed, and then in 5 minutes it went down by 9 subscribers. I said, wait a minute, this is a brand new channel. There's no way that in 5 minutes 9 people individually decided to unsubscribe. I haven't even posted anything that might have offended anybody in the last day or so. So YouTube definitely messes with the numbers. I was on one show that had 226,000 views after 5 days. Then YouTube froze the views, and after a month, it was still at 226,000. So YouTube definitely messes with the stats. You don't really know
Absolutely.
how many subscribers you have or how many views you truly have.
And I actually, even
So,
on Rumble or BitChute, I'm not sure if the numbers are factual. I've seen,
right.
I'll go and look and see how many people have seen a video, and then all of a sudden, overnight, the number is half. Well, how does that happen? So there's strange things happening all the way around.
You mentioned infiltration of the media. It's interesting. George Orwell's 1984. Um, Winston Smith gets a book from um, the leader who he's gone to, who he starts, O'Brien, who he starts to trust. And the book is like telling the whole scheme of the New World Order. And then when Winston Smith is on the torture table, O'Brien tells him, we wrote that book. In other words, the alt media in George Orwell's 1984, the government was controlling that too. So this is nothing new.
No.
They brag about how they will control every branch, every whether it's communist, aristocratic, or somewhere in between. They will control every form of media. Um, so
Yeah, yeah.
those of us trying to be independent try to work around the system as much as we can, but they do make it difficult.
Very difficult. So, do you notice in general in the US that there are more people becoming aware of what's going on? I mean, I always think as things get dark, light becomes more apparent or obvious. Have you noticed a growing awareness in the US?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when I had my COVID book out, Amazon censored it, but I did my own printing because I knew they were going to end up censoring it sooner or later. So I, I got contacted by a couple out in California that said, a year ago nobody wanted to listen, but now in the midst of the lockdown, a lot of people are listening now. I think that you have to be pretty unaware not to sense that something's not right in the world when you look at the changes in the media, when you see how dirty Disney has gotten. If you've been around for a while, especially, if you're very young, you may not sense the changes because they do boil the frog and they do it fairly slowly. But the introduction of transgenderism, all these things, the wars that are unjustified, the depletion of our economy, the job loss and inflation, all the things that are happening to us around us, all these negatives, people have to, you'd think that most people would start to say something's not right here and that
Hmm.
they would start to open up. And I think that it's certainly true that I don't think the number of people who understand the truth has been going down. I certainly think it's been going up. It's just not going up with the speed that we would like to see.
Hmm. Well, keep up your great work. I mean, James Perloff, you're a prolific writer. You have 8 books. You're working, I'm sure, on another one. What's your latest, or can you tell us?
Well, no, I don't have a book right now. It takes a long time to write a book. The last one took 6 months. Right now, I'm just working on who really wrote the Declaration of Independence. That's my next video. It was not Thomas Jefferson. I'll leave it at that. Somebody just come in. I'm still on the radio.
Okay, okay. All right.
No, no,
I'll let
we
you
don't,
go, but
no, no, no.
yeah.
They're not in this room, so it's
Mm,
okay. Um, um, yeah, I am on Twitter. I am on Telegram like you.
hmm
Um, I am on LinkedIn and I am on Gab, which is spoken of as a free speech platform, and I try
hmm
to keep people informed. I have my website, jamesperloff.net, and my YouTube channel. The hashtag is at jamesperloff1, Perloff. Um, so those are the main channels that I'm using right now. And of course, podcasts like yours, which
hmm
has always been a tremendous thing that I've been grateful for because it provides a platform to spread the truth.
Well, you have done remarkable research on the deep state and all sorts of topics. I mean, I could talk to you all day. I prefaced this meeting before we started recording by saying, pretend we're sitting on a bus together and I'm just curious, yeah, asking you lots of questions. But I could honestly chat with you all day because you're a wealth of
Mm.
information and you've got a remarkable
Oh,
memory. So keep up the great work, keep writing. And we'll stay in touch. There may be some point in the future that I think it's time for us to have another chat, but really
sure.
interesting. And I'll
Oh,
put the
well, thank you.
links. I'll put links in the
Oh,
notes for, well, your website is the best because your website
mhm.
is really the mothership of everything. So, but I really appreciate your time.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And if if you're just another passenger on the bus, you're an extremely well-informed passenger. I have to say that.
Well, it's been so interesting. Thank you again. It's been a
Thank
fascinating chat.
thank you, Marianne, and God bless
Okay.
the audience. Yeah.